People, it is the 3rd of the 2nd. I hope we are all well. Welcome to Newspaper Breakdown. We have a number of stories to get through. It was a lot harder to find news today because I don't like to cover what I find to be shit. So it was a lot harder to gather some interesting news stories, but I think we've got some. So we'll start with off the back of constant criticism directed at the government over a string of ethics related news. The UK government looks set to accelerate the process of publishing ministers' financial interests. This is ministers' financial interests, this isn't just MPs' financial interests. It comes amid mounting accusations of a culture of sleaze at the top of the government. Think VIP lanes, think Nadeem Zahawi. Just under the time of Sunak, we have had Williamson and Zahawi have both been sacked, and Raab is under investigation over allegations of bullying. So even just 100 days under him, and we're not even looking at if you look at Boris Johnson, the likes of Patterson, the likes of Pincher, all of these fucking people. The most recent Minister's Interests Register was published last May when Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister. So if you think about that, Boris Johnson left in July. It has been less than a year since Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, yet it feels like fucking decades. The reason it's meant to be every 6 months, but the reason it's been longer than that is due to the high turnover of ministers, with Truss coming in, bringing in ministers. You had Boris Johnson do reshuffles, Truss and Sunak all bringing in different ministers, people leaving, people coming back in, people being sacked. And that's the reason why it has been delayed. The register of backbench MPs, their interest is continually updated. So all of the time we learn. That is the reason why at the moment we're learning how much Boris Johnson is making all of the fucking time. Because if you're a backbench MP, it is continually updated. Why it isn't continually updated for ministers, your guess is as good as mine. Regular updates could have, of course, brought to light issues like Zahawi a lot quicker, like straight away, because we would have known he was a lying fuck. So hopefully that is something that will actually be coming in soon. If not, at least we'll get a minister's interest register soon, so we can see just how much they're all getting. A handful of Tory backbenchers are looking to put pressure on Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to cut the cost of childcare in next month's budget. Shock and all, this is actually a nice thing a selection of Tory MPs are doing. It's nice. The proposals include changing subsidies and relaxing employment regulations in an attempt to bring down costs quickly. I'm not really necessarily comfortable with the idea of relaxing employment regulations. I think that employment regulations are quite an important thing, rights for workers. Britain is not only one of the most expensive countries in the world for childcare, but currently experts claim that the sector is in crisis. So 2 for the price of 1. It costs a lot and you're not getting tons for it. In the last 5 years, costs have risen by 21% across the UK, with families now spending more than a quarter of their joint incomes on childcare, compared with the OECD average of just 9%. That is remarkable. You can also take into account, of course, the fact that we are not earning as much as our OECD counterparts anymore, because that's what happens when you have a government that has looked to destroy the country. But with such a 21% for us, 9% as an average, that is a monumental fucking difference. One of the other demands is for the government to make it easier for parents to apply for the tax-free allowance to which they are entitled. They are entitled to up to £2,000 a year. As of March 2021, only a fifth of those eligible were signed up to the scheme. This is a problem that we see on many different walks on the welfare system, where it is hard to actually sign up for these things. And you make it more complicated, people go, Christ, well, I'll do it tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes. This is the truth that we all know. So this story is actually, although it's all the bad stuff of it's so expensive to have children, and you have to make it cheaper to have children. We have an aging population and our population is declining. The only way to stop that is to fuck more, have more children. Personally, I wouldn't have children. I do not want children. The reason I don't want children, because I was always taught you do not invite someone you love into a burning fucking building. That's what I was taught. But if you are going to have children, let's make sure that people can actually afford it. That would be a plan. According to the Delegated Powers and Regulatory Reform Committee, which is a committee of peers that consider whether proposed legislation is given appropriate parliamentary oversight. I understand that was a lot of long words. And whether the government is overstepping its power. Should have finished the sentence really before I did that little bit. The retained EU law bill, which is the law that I've spoken about a number of times on this, that will let ministers revoke or amend thousands of EU laws on the UK statute book, is a significant departure from the position taken by successive governments since the referendum. Namely, that Parliament would take back control of our laws. This particular bill is basically opposite to everything they've been claiming. And you have not seen many, if any, Brexit supporting far-right small-dick pile of human waste go against this bill for its obvious lack of democracy, obvious lack of taking back control, obvious lack of sovereignty. Why? Because all of these wank-stained, fuck-knuckled, pointless human beings don't give a toss. Do not give a toss about anything that they say out loud. The normal procedure for changing the law in the UK involves debate, committees, amendments, and several stages of parliamentary security, most of which will be sidestepped with this bill. Ministers have control, full control. The committee writes that the bill constitutes a blank cheque in the hands of ministers. Parliament's limited power to scrutinise will be wholly compromised. There's your take back control, there's your sovereignty, there's your fucking democracy. Once again, they do not give a shit. They do not even come close to giving a shit. There are rocks in Outer Mongolia that care more about the democracy of this country, the fairness of this country, and the justice of this country than fucking Brexit supporters. Shit. Three stories left. Yeah. Energy regulator Ofgem has ordered all suppliers to suspend the practice of forcibly installing prepayment meters after an investigation alleged agents acting on behalf of British Gas had broken into vulnerable customers' homes to fit such devices. spoke about this yesterday. This is the Times investigation that provided evidence of multiple other cases where such meters had been fitted into their homes of vulnerable customers under a court warrant, despite Ofgem's rules stipulating that such devices could not be forcibly installed into the homes of people in very vulnerable situations. Ofgem have worked incredibly quickly. The investigation came out, and within a couple of days, everything's banned. You can't do it, stop it, ban. If you want to be picky or potentially correct, you could say that Ofgem should already be aware of what was happening and should have stopped it before there was a need for an investigation, if you want to look at it that way. That potentially a regulator should know the workings of the people they are regulating. If you want to look at it in that particular way, you can do. I wouldn't hold it against you. Right. This is a touch of a longer one. The opinion poll, or a new opinion poll by Lucid Talk, suggests that the majority of unionists in Northern Ireland would vote in favour of scrapping the Good Friday Agreement if a referendum was held today. Start off with that. Fucking lunatics. Every single mad bastard who would get rid of the Good Friday Agreement. Fuck 'em. This comes after 25 years of constant opposition against the peace agreement by the DUP, Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party. Never trust a party with democratic in, liberal in, nationalist. If they're trying to force it home to you, I mean, SNP were nationalist. You just don't trust a nationalist party, do you? History tells you don't trust a nationalist party. But if you're going like the Lib Dems, oh, we're liberal. Why are you saying it so hard? Like a comedian walking on stage, male comedian going, well, I'm a feminist. Why are you telling me? Why are you telling me that? What are you hiding? DUP were some of the only people who opposed one of the most successful peace agreements of last century, which not only got cross-party support during a time of fraught and challenging politics, and of course the fucking Troubles, but received a 71% endorsement from Northern Ireland. DUP, of course, they're the ones who took £1 billion bribe from May to support her Brexit plans. So we already know that they're shit people. Have been using their opposition of the Good Friday Agreement as a means to push their own political agendas, undermining the agreement to attempt things like the Northern Ireland Bill of Rights, integrated education, Irish language legislation, shared housing schemes, and the Civic Forum. The latter served as a body established under the Good Friday Agreement to examine socio-economic issues and provide a bridge between civic society and politicians. This was abandoned in 2002 and never was revived after one of the many Stormont collapses. This is very interesting because we've seen a number of stories like this. You have a look at this, you have a look at Brexit, and this story coming up actually. I'll say a bit on this in a moment, on the DUP Good Friday Agreement story in a moment, because finally, this is new research by the Constitution Society has said that Dominic Raab's pet project to remove human rights and replace it with the Bill of Rights would breach international law and represent a dangerous effort to undermine democracy. Part of the report also states that media coverage has played a vital role in fomenting the backlash to human rights legislation. It all started in the early 2000s with a narrative beginning in part of the tabloid press that the Human Rights Act was there to protect lawbreakers and not the law-abiding citizens. Politicians from both sides, Labour and Tory, instead of correcting this narrative, used that narrative. They used it for their own needs and pushed the narrative like it was true. Of course, it isn't. What will be interesting here is to see what will happen if Dominic Raab's current investigation into his bullying gets rid of him. Because when Liz Truss came in as Prime Minister, the Bill of Rights was chucked away because Dominic Raab wasn't high up in, I don't even think he got a cabinet position under Truss, and so they just got rid of it. It'll be interesting if they're able to get rid of it if Dominic Raab fucks off again. But have a look with the DUP and their 25 years of work. Have a look at Brexit with this entire fucking country's work with since the 80s of consistently blaming the EU for everything. Who's to blame? Oh, it's because of EU red tape. And that's one of the reasons why we ended up voting the way we did for Brexit, because there was no honesty, there was no truth in the matter. There was nothing to say just how powerful we were in the European Union, how over 70% of all of the legislation brought in at the European Union was done at our behest, the fact that we were top of the table. It is the exact same with the Good Friday Agreement and the DUP continually using the Good Friday Agreement as an excuse. This is what's wrong, this is what's doing bad, this is the problem. We see it the same with human rights. This is bad, this is the problem, this is what's stopping you from being happy. The reason you can't get an erection is because of the EU. The reason that you've never fucking smiled is because of the Good Friday Agreement. People who want to get something, these utter bastards, have vastly more patience than we give them credit for. Brexit was a 20-30 year hard graft to get to the point where we got a referendum. Good Friday Agreement, trying to get rid of the Good Friday Agreement, the DUP, that's 25 years. Human rights, trying to get rid of the human rights, that came in the 90s. They have been putting in work to make sure that when you hear about the Good Friday Agreement, when you hear about the European Union, when you hear about human rights, that your views are not, these are actually good things for us. The fact, the truth, the reality. No, what they want is for you to hear their narrative. And so you hear about human rights and you say, well, actually, human rights, it's only there to protect criminals. I don't get anything from the human rights. European Union, oh, we're getting rid of freedom of movement for everyone else. Oh yeah, they shouldn't be able to come over here. You can't go anywhere. That's the reality. You don't put yourself into it. Same with Good Friday Agreement. I'm not sure how to stop that, by the way. I would need more thought about it. Something in it. No. As always, I don't do weekends, so I'll catch you Monday.